Greetings and welcome once again to the Gaming Codex, the show where I try to explain to you all the various words and terms used to describe the video games in the video games industry. And today's term is that of Machinima, or Machinima, as some people may call it. According to a general definition, Machinima is the use of real-world computer graphics engines to create a cinematic production. Most often, video games are used to generate the computer animation. This is transformative art based in video games, if you will. That is, using the resources put before you by the game in a graphical sense, with its engine, with its animation systems, with all its basic components that let it be a game, repurposed for the task of creating a movie, a short film, a tiny little thing, even the kind of really stupid creations you will sometimes see on the internet because it's the internet. It can't help itself, and we wouldn't have it any other way. Even though video games have let people essentially record and in a limited way even edit their own videos in game engines since probably the days of 4D driving and that stunt game with the planes and pretty much anything that called itself a simulator back in the day, the art of machinima did not really take off back in those days, in the early days of computing, mostly because actually recording video from those and repurposing that video as a standalone element, something that can be viewed without the game itself, was not really easy. There was a little in the way of internet and a very little in the way of power, computing power, at the disposal of normal people, gamers, enthusiasts of movie making through video games, that would allow them to create such a feat. This, however, would change as time went on, namely as Quake came along, and it too had the feature of recording video in-game, just as Doom did. But now we were at a different point in time. This was a 3D age. You could do things with a camera that you could not do in Doom. You kinda could in a lot of other games before it. But there was also the internet now, and people could use it to spread this simple, tiny video called Diary of a Camper from '96, made by United Ranger Films. It was simple, it was crude, but it is the basis upon which machinima or machinima, depending on how you want to pretend it's spelled in English, is built. And from there, for many years, over a decade, it blossomed into its own art form. There being even award ceremonies dedicated to it, where creators from all over the world would gather together and have their work evaluated, praised, enjoyed by many. There haven't been award ceremonies like that for about a decade and a bit more than that, actually. Mostly since machinima hasn't really been all that popular in the last couple of years. But in its heyday, you had things like Red vs. Blues, which is probably the most famous one of all, and things like Freeman's Mine, which is totally not an idea that I was doing at one point as well, until somebody pointed out that this was also a thing, and well, let's not get into that. So what is the popular definition of machinima? Well, that would be that YouTube network that screwed over a ton of people. The name Machinima or Machinima is tied to pretty much that network that on the one hand does do some nice things. It funded some non-Machinima content, actually, a lot of live action stuff instead of actual machinima, but for the most part has done, well, it's a YouTube network, it's a mafia, so let's not get into that. Machinima has sort of dropped off the radar a bit in the past decade, and it's done so because, well, making it really takes effort, and in the age of YouTube, in the age of really quickly consumed and quickly made entertainment, there are cheaper alternatives, there are less time-consuming alternatives. There are things like Let's Plays, where people will just comment over gameplay, and if they're good enough or they scream loud enough, they will attract a lot of attention and be successful with something that you may see as a spin-off of Machinima in a way, because it's more about the entertainment value than anything else related to critiquing a game, I would say. But that has also left the actual work of Machinima a bit ignored, even though the technology that is used to create Machinima has gotten much better in the past couple of years. Initially, the way you did it is that you joined a multiplayer server with a bunch of friends and you all acted out a skit that you wrote, a story. and one of the players had to film it. Now you could add the dialogue after the event, you could add effects, you could add all sorts of things that you wanted to add depending on how skilled you were with an editing suite and what access you had to it, but the majority of it was taken film, if you will, in-game in real time. Then we started getting games that allowed for puppeteering, things like, well, Gmod, which is a modification of Half-Life 2, and then, also coming from Valve, we got the Source Filmmaker, which pretty much removed the need for having actors, independent people controlling characters. You could just do everything in the editor, animate it to your heart's content, and so we did get a bunch of magnificent and superb things. And yes, things like Freeman's Mind are also classified as machinima because although it still follows the gameplay of Half-Life, although it still uses pretty much the entirety of the game as is, that's just the framework for it, because the story evolving, the performance that's there, that's not in the game itself, that is created, that is transformative art. So what would be the marketing definition for Machinima? Well, that is, we actually didn't sue people because of this. When this art form began, there was a bit of a discussion about how it should be dealt with by the big publishers, and there were talks of licensing elements of it or limiting some portions of it. In general, there were murmurs that maybe people shouldn't be allowed to do stuff like this. I mean, it is using copyrighted properties to create something that's not being monetized by the owner. Thankfully, that dropped like really soon, and companies decided, you know what, we're gonna let you do what you want to do. It's no problem with us. You do what you can. It's basically free publicity for us, so have at it. That was in an age that is not today, because in the age it is today, they would totally not allow that. What with all the copyright paranoia that is going on in the video games industry most times, it's not as bad as it used to be when people realized that pretty much anything you would upload on YouTube from a video game was somehow copyrighted by representative studios that would claim your work as theirs, even though it's not their work, it's their copyright, which you are licensing through the fact that you bought the game. And well, it's a complicated thing. Copyright reform is needed, probably not in the way that somebody in the EU wants it, but the important thing is that Machinima is completely legal. Okay, it's supposed to be non-commercial, so you can't sell it unless, well, you get into an agreement with the holders of the copyright, which is what the Red Blue people did in their series on Netflix. And you should go watch it if you want to. I think it's also still on YouTube as well. I pretty much recommend you go and watch just about any Machinima you can find that was made between the early 2000s and the mid 2000s, because there was kind of a golden age of Machinima back then. One of the things on the background you're seeing now is probably the one with Bill and John, which was made entirely in a flight sim. How can you make Machinima in a flight sim? It barely has any characters, it's got planes, yeah, but that's where the artwork comes in. That's where the creativity is needed. You have a canvas and you have paint. The rest is up to you. There were even games built on the whole concept of Machinima being a thing, like the movies, which sadly came out before, well, YouTube was a thing, so it didn't really take off. It didn't really help the downward spiral that the art form took, and was inevitably replaced by, well, people having cameras and recording themselves doing funny stuff or just filming gameplay. So closes another edition of the Gaming Codex. Come back next time when we will talk about a brand new subject. Goodbye.